Today, I'm honored to present Lieutenant Colonel Michael Rounds for today's seminar. Mike is an old friend of mine, and his background is he has a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from West Point, a master's degree in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Minnesota. He's completed an Engineer Officer Basic Course, Tank Commander Certification, Armor Officer Advanced Course, Joint Officer Planning, Army Command, Ranger School, Airborne School, and Air Assault School. It's a little bit different background than what we have for our normal seminar speaker here today. You guys better all behave. I saw when he said move up front. A lot of people got up very quickly and moved up front, and that was probably a good decision. All right. Lieutenant Colonel Rounds has served in a variety of engineer command and staff positions. He's been 22 years in the Army, serving with the 1st Infantry Division in Germany, 1st Cavalry Division in Texas, 104th Airborne Division in Kentucky and Iraq. From 2009 to 2010, Lieutenant Colonel Rounds was in charge of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers at Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. And that's a lot of what he's going to be speaking to us about today. He's also served 2 tours at West Point as an instructor and is currently Deputy Commandant of the U.S. Military Prep School over at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And Lieutenant Colonel Rounds and I were in graduate school together at Minnesota, where I was his supervisor. So, a little bit of that. All right, so I'm happy to have him as our seminar speaker.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Amy and I go back a long ways. I thought when she invited me to come down, I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? Because I had recently returned from Afghanistan. So I thought, well, maybe we could talk about, jet impingement on cylindrical surfaces and stuff that we did at Minnesota. But basically, I was like her lab assistant. I didn't even really know what was going on. But she got me through my master's degree. And what, as a career Army engineer officer and instructor at West Point for a couple of times, that's the reason I was going to graduate school. We were at Minnesota together. And then I went from that position to teach at West Point. I taught thermodynamics, fluid mechanics, heat transfer, and mechanical design 2 different times at West Point. So, and I really, I have a passion for engineering, a passion for education. I really love teaching. And in my current job, which I just moved to 2 years ago, took a little hiatus for a year to go to Afghanistan, but I'm back at the Military Academy Prep School, Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And that is basically a school where we bring in kids that are trying to get into West Point but didn't quite make it, and we give them a year of extra schooling and stuff to try to get them ready to go up there. And our school there at Fort Monmouth, anyone from Jersey Shore area, ever heard of Fort Monmouth? You know where that is? That post is closing due to the base realignment closure maybe this summer. So in the midst of this job that I'm doing at the prep school, we are building a almost $100 million new campus up at West Point for our prep school to go into, which is about half finished right now. So it's an interesting job right now. It'll be a very interesting summer. We'll graduate our class in May, and by July we'll have to be up at West Point with the whole school ready to go to accept our next class of prepsters. So what I want to talk to you guys a little bit about today, engineering. I think it's going to be a lot different than a lot of the seminars that you've had before. I'm not going to show you any pictures from the lab. I'm not going to show you any equations, no equations. Just a lot of pictures of what I was asked to do this past year. And again, for me it wasn't something that I was really comfortable with, but my name popped up on a database and said, hey, this guy's got a master's in engineering, he's a professional engineer, you can do this job. And I said, well, wait a minute, I've spent 20 years in the Army running around with infantry guys blowing things up and destroying things and not really building anything. What do I know about construction and engineering and those kind of things? They say, hey, you'll figure it out. Just get on the plane and go. So that's kind of what I did. And what I want to talk to you about is just kind of make you aware of what's going on in Afghanistan. It gets some press and there's a lot of things you hear. But after being on the ground for a year, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, I can tell you that coming back and listening to the news, it's like, really? That's not what my experience was at all. And so I kind of wanted to there's a lot of pictures, a lot of things we'll run through. And as we go, I'd really like you guys to ask questions as we go. I'm going to kind of show you a little bit about where we're at and some of the missions that we had and some of the challenges that we had. And, I look at engineering as, you're learning here. We're undergrads. How many undergrads here? Okay, good number. And grad students? So we got a good mix of both. You know, as an undergrad, you're still trying to figure out what you're going to do, and these are the basic building blocks, the foundations. You know, mechanical engineering is all about understanding how the world works. You know, thermodynamics and energy and transfer, all that kind of stuff. That is important to kind of build your knowledge base so that you can go out. But at the end of the day, the difference between a scientist and an engineer is an engineer goes out and solves problems. An engineer goes out and takes the knowledge that they've accumulated and tries to figure out something new or figure out a way to make something better, right? At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. And so when, you know, when we teach at West Point and we talk to our cadets, they get ready to go out as lieutenants. They're going out into some very environments that really there's no playbook for it. There's no knowledge base for it. It's something that's completely different. Nobody's really done some of these things before. So we want them to think like engineers, to gather all the facts, to go on the, you know, on the knowledge that they have of how things work and what happens, and then try to make the best of their situation. And that's what we kind of do. So here's my agenda. Just give you a quick overview of Afghanistan. So this will be engineering, this will be political science, it'll be a little bit of everything. And then we'll talk about the Army Corps of Engineers in Afghanistan and what they do and how they do their job. And then I'll focus on two different areas, really talk about Bagram Airfield, which is where the office that I was in charge of at Bagram, which is about 50 miles north of Kabul in the northeast part of Afghanistan. I'll talk about the constructions, the processes and the things we did at Bagram, which was significantly different than the projects that we had out in the provinces, what we call outside the wire, out there in the Afghan villages and towns and working directly with the Afghans on some of the projects they were doing. And then we'll talk a little bit about the future of Afghanistan and what is going to make a difference over there. What's our goal? What are we trying to do over there? And how does engineering play into that and what we're going to do as a nation? And then if we have some time left, we'll go some Q&A. There's Afghanistan. What can you tell me about Afghanistan by looking at the map? Somebody?
Landlocked.
Okay, very good. Landlocked, right? Surrounded by 6 different countries. Iran, Pakistan, little border here with China, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, okay, and landlocked. Okay, so engineering challenges right off the bat, right? Where are you getting your supplies from? How does that happen? What happens there? But it's a very mountainous country. It's very segregated, okay? And so you hear a lot about the country of Afghanistan. What does that mean for an Afghan to think about a country, being a part of a country? For a lot of them, that's a foreign concept. This is the Panjshir Valley. We're Panjshiris, and we could give a flying whatever about what somebody in Kabul says, right? There's definitely an element to that. Let's talk a little bit about Afghanistan. Some things that are interesting. So it's a little bigger than Texas. It's got 28.4 million people. Check that out. Life expectancy, 44 years. Wow, that's old, right? But when you see some of these guys who look like they're my age, but they look like they're 80. Okay, this is big time third world stuff right here. There is no infrastructure in Afghanistan. This is a country that's been at war since the Soviets really invaded in 1979. The Mujahideen fought them off. From the time the Soviets left 10 years later, the constant conflict between different warring factions to try to get control of the government. Ultimately, the Taliban wins out, right, with their brand of what life is all about. And outside of the Panjshir Valley, which is an area we worked, I'll talk a little bit more about, they basically had the entire country under control when 9/11 happened. Okay, so then since then, in 2001, the U.S. went in, organized the Northern Alliance, kicked the Taliban out, got the government going, and then got distracted by something called Iraq. Okay, so still troops over there, things going on, but definitely back burner. And then the Taliban had a kind of a resurgence, and now we're a little more focused on what's going on there over the past 2 years, which included a troop surge that was going on while we were there, which is more engineering problems, more people coming in. But this is another huge thing to look at right here. The literacy rate is 28% for people that are 15 years and older. 28%. Think about that as you're trying to talk about having competent engineers and construction companies and stuff, and only a quarter of the people can even read. Okay, so where's the education? And Sunni Muslim, Shia Muslim, that makes up 99% of the population. This I want to throw up just to kind of let you know, as far as the U.S. Army and the coalition forces that are over there, where everybody's at. And this is another part of the complications of all the things that are going on in Afghanistan. This is Regional Command East, North, West, and South. The U.S. Army is in charge of RC East. While I was there, it was the 101st Airborne Division, and then they handed off to the 82nd Airborne Division. The Germans were in charge up here, and then the Canadians and British down here. And I'm not even sure who was in charge out here, because I didn't really worry too much about it. But Kandahar you hear a lot about. That's an area where really it's the hottest right now, because that's where the Taliban and Mullah Omar started, and there's some pretty hardcore Taliban folks up here. This is Kabul, and you can see right this little flag right here, that's Bagram. So we were right up in there, and that's where, and our focus was, our region was these four provinces: Panjshir, Kapisa, Parwan, and Bamyan. And Bamyan was an interesting case. Kapisa, you see the U.S. flags, actually Kapisa was taken over by the French. So the French were in charge of Kapisa. In Parwan and Panjshir, it was the U.S., and over in Bamyan were the Kiwis, the New Zealanders. Anybody had any experience with Kiwis or New Zealanders? Yeah? What do you think of those New Zealanders?
They're pretty relaxed.
Yeah. No worries, mate. Yeah, everything's no worries. Yeah, they were a lot of fun to work with, and I'll tell you a story. I'll show you some of those stories as we go. But that's basically our area. And with the Army Corps of Engineers, when I first got there, they had an engineer district that covered this. They called the Afghan Engineer District. Now, you guys probably have been around in, the Army Corps of Engineers. You might have drove into a park someplace and you see a little red castle and it says Army Corps of Engineers. Anybody ever see anything like that? Have any idea? Nothing? Zero? Zero? Okay. Well, basically, the Army Corps of Engineers has a whole country split up in districts and divisions. And they do water management, a lot of dams and those kind of things. River management, like in Minnesota at the St. Paul district, commerce coming up and down. New Orleans got a lot of press with the Army Corps of Engineers and building levees down there. Not necessarily good stuff all the time. But the whole country's divided up under different districts. And you're usually an engineer colonel that's in charge, and they might have 2 or 3 other officers that are working for them, and the other 99.5% of the people that work in those districts are civilian government service employees. And so when we had an Iraq district and we have an Afghan district, and while I was over there, they actually split it into 2, and we had a northeast district and a southwest. So that's really, we didn't get too worried about what they were doing down here, but we were focused up here. And so in each of the district that had this whole area had 5 area offices. And each of those area offices was, the OIC officer in charge was a lieutenant colonel. And so I had the Bagram office. Now the Bagram office had 70% of the entire district's construction, because it's the biggest base in Afghanistan. With the troop surge going on, by the time I left, there was close to 30,000 people at Bagram Air Base. And when I say people, I don't just mean soldiers, contractors, civilian employees, special forces, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, coalition partners. It was amazing. But it's a huge base, so there's a lot of infrastructure going on there. And in my office, while I was there, we had $800 million of construction going on, just in my office. So it was an interesting challenge. There's me with Senior Master Sergeant Mac and one of my civilians there. You can kind of get a feel. I put that in there just to see the terrain. And Bagram sits in the Shamali Plain, in the north part of the Shamali Plain. It flows out of those mountains, and the plain runs all the way down to Kabul. Bagram has always been very important. It's been fought over for a long time. The Soviets had a huge base there when they were there. Once they left, the Northern Alliance and the Taliban fought back and forth over it for many years. And of course, when the Soviets left, they were a little ticked off, so they decided to just mine the whole area. When the Taliban and others, they were also mining the area. And so still to this day, what limits what we're doing over there is the number of mines and how much we can get cleared so we can build stuff over there. But it's actually kind of beautiful because it's surrounded on 3 parts by these beautiful mountains. So on a clear day, you could actually, it's not too bad. It reminds you a little bit of like western Colorado, maybe. And I just put this in there because this was a picture someone took me. So this is Bagram. And again, I had to be careful about what kind of things I could put up here because it all has to be unclassified, of course. So like pictures of the airfield and all that kind of stuff, I can't show you a lot of that. But I can show you, to give you an idea, this is the main runway here and taxiways. All these different colors are different projects that we had going on. So if there's a color, that means it's some form of a project, whether it's a helipad over here, runway taxiway, sewage treatment plant, barracks, whatever. The bottom line is if you took this, we used to run PT, physical training, on this route, and if you went this route right here, that's 8 miles. Okay, so it's a pretty big base, 8 miles around, and if you add this area back in here, that's another, that'd be an 11-mile loop if you include this back portion right there. That's one of the unclassified pictures they had out there that showed Bagram. But it's Bagram Army Airfield. We made sure everybody understood. It's Bagram Army Airfield because there's a 2-star general. He's an Army guy and he's in charge. But there was a lot of Air Force guys there. So, and that's good news. When you're around the Air Force, I'm telling you what, those guys they don't go anywhere unless you got air conditioning, you got showers, you got it's a big deal to them. So if you can get close to where the Air Force is at, life is usually pretty good for you Army guys, you Army grunts that are out there. So, but they're obviously, you can see all hours of the night. I mean, that's one of the things you had to get used to is you're in you're trying to sleep, and every 15 minutes there's jets taking off, there's things landing. There's constant air traffic going in and out of there. That's our little home away from home. That's our area office, and you see, again, we had a bunch of these. We had some of these up-armored vehicles for when we go off post, but I'll talk some more about that later. We had a bunch of these little, pickup trucks and others that were there. And you can see, you'll see this form of construction a lot. What those actually are these 40-foot mill van connexes. They get them over there, they don't know what to do with them, so they start cutting out holes in them and bolting them together and making them into both, barracks and office spaces in there. So that was where our office was. And this was my crew. Okay, so there, look at some of these faces. These were people here that worked in the office. They didn't get off much, but we're talking about civilian employees. This is my first time in the Army working real closely with civilians. These are Corps of Engineer employees, and they had been from the St. Paul district that were sitting behind a desk, and they decided, well, I'm going to sign up for this 6-month tour to go over, or a year tour, or whatever it is. And it was neat because I was a little leery, civilians. How is it going to be to work with them? But I'll tell you what, these are great Americans right here. A lot of them, some of them had military experience before. A lot of them didn't. And I'd ask them, why did you come over? And they said, I felt the responsibility, and I've never been in the military, but I felt like this was something I could do to help contribute. And probably the fact they were getting paid almost 3 times more than their normal salary didn't hurt. So, lots of incentives to get these folks over. But they're great folks because these, you're saying these are not, when you're saying construction, you're talking about doing construction. We don't actually do the construction. We're quality assurance. That's what the Corps does. So we hire these contractors, and these guys all are, they're out on the job site. Some are electricians. Some are, structural people. Some are HVAC people. All these different people, and they're inspecting, really holding the contractor to do what he's supposed to do on Bagram. So here's some of the challenges we had at Bagram. We'll talk a little bit about those. Mine clearance, like I mentioned. The place is probably, there's no, when they first went in there, you couldn't go anywhere without stepping on a mine. And there's still huge chunks of Bagram that have not been demined yet. And there's a process going on constantly. They think it'll take 3 or 4 more years to actually get all the areas clear of mines. Contractors, that's always fun. That was interesting watching all that go on. Logistics, we talked some concrete issues. Bagram had 5 batch plants right outside the wire. And then we had some interesting situations going on with quality control and all that kind of stuff. But we had a lot of concrete construction going on. We'll talk a little bit about security. Obviously, where does your workforce come from in that situation? Well, a lot of it was third country nationals. There were a lot of firms, lead contractors. Some were from the States, and some were from Turkey. Turkey had a lot of firms over there, and they would bring over third country nationals, which basically meant not Americans and not Afghans, and they would be able to live on the base in these little camps. But they wouldn't let the Afghans come on base. So then we had all kinds of issues because the Afghans, they would let them on base, but they'd have to wait for hours going through all the security checks. So then the contractors didn't really want to hire the Afghans, because it was such a pain in the butt to get them the security stuff and get them through. And at the end of the day, they're trying to say, wait a minute, what are we trying to do here? We are trying to build capacity within Afghanistan. We want the Afghans to be the ones doing the work, but we don't want a bunch of third country nationals coming over and living in camps and doing the construction. That benefits us getting facilities done, but it doesn't really meet the bigger goal, which is trying to build capacity within Afghanistan. And then some expeditionary versus permanent construction. I'll show you some more pictures as we talk a little bit about that. So that's it, all over the place. You had these little mine signs everywhere, and that was a huge challenge. You just knew not to go somewhere nobody had been before. That was the bottom line. You just didn't go wander off. And we had the mine clearance guys. I think I have some pictures. That's just one. It's kind of fuzzy, but this thing, there's several different levels to how they do this, and they actually demine it to about 1 meter deep. And one of the last steps is this thing, which is almost like a snow thrower. Once they go through, they basically just take this stuff and chunk up all the soil and shoot it up in the air. So this is an area that had been demined, but it takes a long time from the time they start going off and basically trying to do these up-armored vehicles with the rollers and all these different things that blow up the mines and there's several different methods to doing that. But that's a huge part, and that at Bagram we were in a position where we just didn't have any swing space at all. If we were trying to move some unit into some other place, we didn't have anywhere to put anybody. So we had a lot of people in tents, and people would look around and say, what's going on? Well, it's just huge areas like this that had not been demined yet. Okay, some of the construction projects we were working on, which was new to me, and I had to learn a lot, again, being a guy that basically just been in the classroom and teaching mechanical engineering and thermal. Here, this was the beginnings of a sewage treatment plant. So at Bagram, which is a big base, we lived pretty well, and we had most of us had barracks type rooms, some semi-private, but we had. What they would do is they had the big water trucks that would come around, and you'd have these big, couple 100-gallon tanks that they would fill up with water, and you might have water heaters and all that kind of stuff, and then, you had 2 other tanks where the water went. If it was the gray water, which meant, think about the sink in the shower, it went in one tank. If it came from a toilet, it went in another tank called black water. So now what do you do with all this stuff? I mean, the gray water, there's certain, things you can do with it. The black water, that's sewage. What do you do with that? And that was, they had contracts with these Afghan firms to take care of that stuff. But you had to always wonder, where are they taking that when they leave the base? Really, where are they really going somewhere to put it in a treatment plant somewhere, or are they just dumping it somewhere? At a certain point, you're like, well, we can only control what we can control. Having served 2 years in Korea a few years back, I can tell you that, you're saying, why are you even worried about environmental concerns over there, right? I mean, the people are living in mud huts, and but years down the road, that stuff will come back, and we have to make sure that what we're doing over there is environmentally sound. So one of the things that they were trying to do was build this sewage treatment plant in conjunction with water treatment plants. We actually had these big projects. We drilled 3 wells, water treatment, water mains, sewer mains, sewage treatment plant, the whole deal. So they're turning Bagram into kind of a big city. So you can see some of the construction. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so these are the clarifier tanks, and again, they have the formwork up, all concrete. Anybody know what they're doing there? Huh? Somebody?
Smoke test.
All right. What are you, civil? You civil?
I work. My grandfather runs civil engineering company.
Yeah. So I had no idea what a slump test was, but a slump test is basically make sure the concrete's the right characteristics. You basically put it in a cone, you flatten out, you lift it up, and based on how far it sinks down, there's a range of values that it could be. Otherwise, it's too wet or it's too dry. So the guys are doing slump tests to check every load of concrete that was coming from the batch plants before they would place it. Yeah. And big pumper truck, that's how they got the concrete in. Guys in there, okay, with the vibrators, got to go in and vibrate, do all this kind of stuff. Another picture later, and I don't know if I had any other later, but what's all this? Any idea? It's all rebar, so that was all. So what you saw there was the 6 clarifier tanks. In front of those tanks were these huge 6, in front of each tank, these huge concrete settling ponds, basically. They'd pump it in. And this thing, it was not quite finished when I was done, but it had the whole the gamut. I mean, they had the UV stuff that was going to, you know, basically to get it in a condition where they could put it back in the creek after treating the sewage. It was high-tech stuff. Keep going the wrong way. One of our other major projects, $100 million airfield project that included runways, taxiways, 2 hangars. Okay, and part of the problem here was again the concrete. There's a certain, it's very the amount of time that you have to get the concrete from the batch plant and place it, right, is very limited. And of course, we had these batch plants. We were trying to do stuff over the fence. The security guys said, no, you can't do that. They got to get in line out there and go through the checkpoints. And there was a lot of negotiations that went on that. And of course, the contractor feels like you're delaying them for any reason, then they're going to say, hey, Corps, you guys are, you know, that wasn't in the contract, so we're going to charge you, the American taxpayer, more money. Okay, so we had a lot of interesting workarounds, and one of them was working at night. In Bagram, you know, it was very being landlocked like that. You can imagine the extremes in temperature were pretty great. The winters were very cold, but by like June, you were done seeing a raindrop for about 4 or 5 months, and it would get about to 120 degrees most days. So it was hot and dry, and so we did a lot of our concrete placement at night. We'd be out there right on the airfield, and these are just some pictures of them doing that, these huge paving machines, where you just take the whole dump truck full of concrete, drop it in there, you got this guy and the scoop shovel smoothing it out, it goes the paving machine, which is moving about as fast as I'm walking. It was moving like that. So it's going forward along there, and then coming out the back, that's what it looks like. You know, you can see it's about knee-high up to that guy, that thick. But it had to be very thick because it has to carry the weight of the aircraft and all that kind of stuff. So we had some real problems with that. We had to really make sure we're doing the brakes on the concrete and checking the strength to make sure it was right. But after a while, you know, again, we got to stay on these guys, but they started getting the hang of it, and they started placing a lot of concrete. All night long, these things would be running right out on the airfield. And just on the other side is where the active runway, so the F-16s would be taken off right next to you. It was pretty interesting. This is one of the hangars that's in the project there, too. It's going to have room for 2 C-130 aircraft, which are huge aircraft. Okay, so. Any idea what that might be? This was part of a fuels project, right? 6 million-gallon tanks and fuel separators, you know, filtering station, fill stands, a whole deal, including a pipeline that ran between the north and south side of the airfield. So again, these are, you know, the concrete base. They had the metal containers and then concrete encased all the way around, and then basically filled up to the top and covered, because you don't want something like that sitting out in the open in case you get some artillery rounds coming in. Not a good combination. So there's some of the formwork that was going up around. It was all concrete encased. There's a part of the filter building that they were building at the time. It was going to be able to take, the whole idea was they could come on to Bog without coming onto the base. They could take the fuel out of the truck, put it in there, send it through the filtering station, send it to the tanks, and then also tank from north to south, and also the fill stands on both inside and outside. So that was one of the other major projects we were working. Some of the piping that was going out to the fill stands out near the airfield. Any idea what that might be? Generators, yeah. There it is. Look at this guy. All right, so that was another project at Bagram. We said, hey, we're building a 50-megawatt power station. The 50 megawatts. How do you do that? Well, what this was, I have some pictures of it. This is a turbine made by a solar company, a 10-megawatt turbine. It's monstrous. When you think about a 10-megawatt turbine, that's a lot. But, you know, you guys have all had thermodynamics, right? And talked about, okay, so if you really think about it, this little area here is the turbine section. So that's really not that big for 10 megawatts. We had 2 of these things that they had an airlift in these huge cargo planes. They had to take this big crane and like going at about 2 miles an hour all the way around the airfield to place these things. That was, you know, that 50 megawatts probably, that may have doubled the total output of power in the entire country of Afghanistan. I mean, they have some ports now of Kabul where you can actually look at it at night and say, wow, it looks like there's lots of lights on down there. But this power was mainly for the Bagram Airfield, and then, you know, at some point, if they're producing enough extra power, because they had these kind of expeditionary power generation things they want to close down and kind of consolidate, but potentially to sell to the local community at some point, if they ever get to the point where they could establish a grid and all that kind of infrastructure that would go with it. And then just looking back down, each of this area where I was taking a picture from was the two 10 megawatt generator turbines, and then each of these was like a 1 megawatt diesel generator. Okay, and you can kind of see, you know, 10 of these that would equal just one of those solar turbines. So again, right, power weight ratio, great things about turbines. But they weren't natural gas, they were fitted for fuel oil, and this was the fuel oil tanks that they had, because that's what was available. I can't show you a lot of pictures of one of our most famous projects because, because I can't. But the whole time everybody was talking about closing Guantanamo Bay, we had a project that we were working on in Bagram that was a detainee facility that was up to would hold up to 1,200 prisoners. So this project was something that was amazing because it had to be done relatively quickly, and we did it in 400 days from clearing the ground of mines. They had up to 1,000 workers on the site every day. About 600 and some were third country nationals, mostly Filipinos, some Indians that were there living in the camp. They worked all day long. That's, you know, that's where they couldn't go anywhere else. And they would bring in up to 300 mostly Masons that were Afghans to build this facility. And of course we had a lot of attention that, you know, every general officer that came through Afghanistan wanted to come and see that. This guy is Kay Eid, who was the senior, I think he's Norwegian, he was the senior UN official, the Red Cross, you know, all these other, you know, after the terrible mistakes we made in Iraq with some of our detention facilities, we were getting a lot of interest in what we were doing there. But the thing about this is that is, you know, right now under control of the Americans in a joint thing with the Afghans, and eventually that whole facility is going to be turned over to the Afghan government in the next, I think, year and a half, including housing an entire brigade of Afghan National Army troops on the facility. So, and then this is what I was telling you about, a lot of the barracks and admin office spaces and stuff. If you look at this, is early on in the phase, these are going to be, you know, rooms basically for people to live in, but these are just these 40-foot mill vans. So they take them, they ship stuff over in them. What are they going to do with them? They actually they'll clean them out and cut them up and bolt them together, and they're actually really good. One of the other things you have to worry about over there is earthquakes. It's in one of the highest risk regions for earthquakes. So again, you have to take that into consideration too when you're doing construction. So these actually end up being very, very good in those kind of situations because they can keep their integrity just as a single block, even when they're all bolted together. This is one I wanted to show you. Is, you know, we talked about expeditionary versus permanent structures, and this is where we get into kind of hazy ground, because all of a sudden, you know, when you're going somewhere expeditionary, you come in, you set up a tent, you feed soldiers, you know, whatever out of the tent. As it becomes more and more of a permanent facility, and when you say permanent, you know, people get kind of, oh, we're not building permanent things over in Afghanistan. Bagram was kind of a unique place for that, because Bagram was identified as the place, if everything else we withdraw from Afghanistan eventually, which is the plan, the one place we'll maintain a presence is probably at Bagram. And so we did, that's why we're building, you know, sewage treatment plants and all these, you know, things. And one of these things was a dining facility which would feed 900 soldiers daily. So it was monstrous. And this is what it looked like a couple weeks before I left. So, I mean, we went from that to that fairly quickly. That's the inside part of it right there. But we had a lot of problems with this because, you know, the contract said to build it this way, and there was a lot of conflicting guidance from the states about whether you're, you know, hey, if you're building this in the United States, you got to have this certain covering for the ceiling, you got to have this, you know, type of covering on the floor, you got this, you know, all these different rules and regulations, which are not bad. It's just that it's hard to build that in a timely manner So your soldiers are sitting outside not being able to use the facility while we argue and fight about all these little kind of minor issues. And so you get involved in that with the contractor and having to go back through your chain of command to try to figure out ways to resolve those issues, most of which we could do, but it was always like, what's the next thing coming around the corner that's going to cause a delay here? We did have some fun at Bagram. That's Toby Keith. He came and gave a concert when I was there for a while. That was a good time. And then last November, we actually had Fox NFL guys came and did. I don't know if any of you guys saw that show they did from Bagram. They actually flew out there and they taped the show. They wanted to do it live, but they were worried that they would have problems. So they actually taped it about 3 hours before it aired. And so we were over there watching them do the show. It was pretty neat. They spent the whole week there and really kind of toured around Bagram and talked to all the troops there and stuff. It was pretty cool. All right, so we talked, big projects in Bagram, and some of the issues we dealt with were the contractors. And honestly, I felt my biggest job, even as an engineer, was representing, the government in these cases with the contractors, making sure that they weren't trying to get away with stuff, that they were doing what they were supposed to do, that we were enforcing the contract, and that's what we had to do. Make sure they had a realistic schedule, that they could stay on schedule, and that they could get the projects finished. Okay, and a lot of times it meant you had to lean on them a little. It's cheaper to ship stuff from Karachi, Pakistan across land than it is to fly it in. But if they're behind schedule, then we have to say, hey, listen, you got to do, what are you going to do to get this thing back on schedule? And there's a whole lot of arm wrestling and negotiation that goes on. It was very interesting, and I was learning a lot because my area engineer was a guy who had served 25 years in the Corps as a government employee, a GS guy. And he was the chief of construction in the Omaha district, which is a big district. And I used to just watch him come in there with these contractors and watch this kind of game go on as he would try to point out what they were doing. They had a million excuses. And you had to know, it's a business decision for them. They're over there to make money. That's the number one thing. They could say all these things about, well, we want to do this right, we want to do this for the soldiers. Yeah, that's great. But the bottom line is they're over there to maximize their profit. And so we had to figure out ways in contracting to put in incentives to get them to get it done early and to stay on schedule. Sometimes that wasn't the easiest thing to do, but it could be frustrating. Totally different challenges out in the provinces. Like I said, we had 4 provinces we were responsible for: Kapisa, Parwan, Bamyan, Panjshir. Now in each of these provinces, they had provincial reconstruction teams. They had little bases out there, very, very small little group. But they were doing not just construction. We had a couple Army Corps people that were part of the PRTs, but they were usually focused more on on government, on civil affairs kind of things. But part of what they were doing was doing construction missions too. Now the Corps had some big projects. We had roads, we had some Afghan National Police buildings, and we had some schools. Those were the primary things we did out in the provinces. Again, contracting now through Afghan firms. So this is the area where we had some real challenges in making sure we were doing quality assurance. First, how do we get out there and check? How often can we check what's going on there? But also, what kind of expertise do these firms have? You got to think about things. You can be, bring the hammer down on them. Okay, they've only done this much, and we're not going to pay them until they get this much done. But there's lots of other things to consider. If you've got a small Afghan firm, and they're making an honest effort to get this project done, and they're employing all these guys, if all of a sudden you say, listen, you didn't get this done this good, we're not going to give you any money, we're not going to pay you, because we paid everything based on the schedule, then you could have a situation now where this guy basically goes, bankrupt, and now he's got a bunch of angry guys that don't have a job anymore. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're talking with these, much different than these very, what I want to say, these big construction firms, U.S. and others, that really knew how to play the game, right? We kept them on track, because we knew we could. These guys we tried to really help. It was much more of a mentoring type thing. You looked at the literacy rate there, and you got to understand that once back in the 60s, if you read any history of Afghanistan, they were pretty good at kind of playing the Soviets against the U.S. They were accepting aid from both sides, and they were getting some things done. They actually had Kabul University was pretty well respected. But once the Soviets came in and then left, and you had the Taliban in charge, At the end of the day, the Taliban is threatened by education. That's the bottom line. I mean, they would much rather tell somebody what the Quran says in their own twisted way than to have them be able to read it for themselves and make their own decisions. So you have a generation plus in Afghanistan that is just missing educated professionals. So they either left or they didn't survive. And so there's a real lack of expertise out there. And so part of our mission becomes, helping these guys have some competent construction firms and helping them be able to complete projects and actually, and profit and be able to do more work. Problem is, some of these companies, they start to do well on one project and then they load up with a couple others, and then all of a sudden they're failing on 3 projects where they can handle 1 but not 3. So it's a constant battle of what we're working at. And so we work with them pretty closely. The PRTs actually have their own kind of pot of money to take and do small projects too. And that was designed so that, the government tends to be a little bureaucratic, right? So if you're a commander out in this province area and you've got a project you want to do, you can't really wait, a year and a half until you get approval and money funded and all this kind of stuff. So they would give the commanders a certain amount of money to do small projects, and that's why we had engineers with those guys. So there was a lot of crossover between our office and the PRT engineer guys to make sure that we were helping each other out and we were working with some of their projects too. And this is part of what we did. I mean, this is some of my team here, but these guys are all Afghans that had been through some of the projects at the Corps. The Corps would run training sessions for these quality assurance guys. We were tapping into a couple places. Kabul University, they're turning out a few engineers. We would try to get them, those guys, and also they've established a military academy similar to West Point. There's actually a bunch of people from West Point in 2002 and 3 that kind of set this academy up. So the engineer officers, if they graduate, we tried to get them as well with the Afghan National Army to work with the Army Corps in these apprentice kind of roles to learn how to do construction management and those kind of things. And these are some of the guys that we were hiring to go out and be the quality assurance guys. But there's sometimes those guys have the best intentions and sometimes they don't, and it's pretty complicated out there, so we have to keep tabs on what they're doing. Parwan and Kapisa, obviously those are the close-in projects, and so when we went out, that's what we had to go out, and these are called MRAPs, Mine Resistant Ambush Protected, MRAP, got an acronym for everything in the Army. MRAPs, and then ASVs, which are these little smaller ones. But anytime we went out to a place to do a construction, to walk through and see what was going on, if it was close by, we went with the infantry or the MPs that had these MRAPs, and then they would provide us security as we walked through some of the construction sites. And that's just inside. We got, it's pretty cool. You could talk to the drivers, listen to the radio, the whole deal. It's all connected through there. They're pretty. It's kind of a one-upsmanship game. When the MRAPs first arrived in Afghanistan, for a long time, the only people that ever got hurt in an MRAP were the ones that in rollovers that weren't wearing their seatbelts and got tossed around. But gradually, unfortunately, a lot of the technology of the explosively formed penetrators and some of the things that we're seeing in Iraq started making its way into Afghanistan. And so, so now there are times when those are you're not even safe in those things. But I can tell you again, the entire time I was there in a year, we never hit one of those. There were areas that we knew we could go, and there were areas that were still not so good, and the areas that we were working in were areas where we knew that we could be pretty safe most of the time. And that was kind of a policy type decision too. It's like, well, listen, if you want to work with us and keep us safe, we'll work with you, and then we'll give you projects and make things better for you. And if you can't, then we won't do much work there. Oops, wrong way. That's the driver there. Kind of see what he's wearing. Full body armor, the whole deal. This is out the back door there, driving through. And this is where we would go through these towns, And then you can kind of see. This is near Bamyan. No, not Bamyan City. This is near Bagram City actually, Charkar. Okay, but check out some. This is high tech for Afghanistan right there. They actually got some electrical wires. People put wires up everywhere, and you have no idea where it's coming from, where it's going. And this was one of our projects that we were taking a look at, which was going to be an Afghan National Police headquarters. And this stack of blocks over here, he walked over and just picked one up and dropped it, and it just completely shattered and just into like dust. So no, that's not going to work too good, you know. So yeah, we had a lot of problems with this one. This was tough, and these were our guys, you know, that were in charge of the project there. We would show up unannounced most of the time just to see that they were actually on the job site and that people were working. And this one actually they did all right on. Put this picture in. This is a Kuwait, not a Kuwait, United Arab Emirates. Had all kinds of different guys that were there. They had a company's worth of guys with the MRAPs, and so they would go out with us a lot of times too as escorts. And of course, they helped a lot with translation, which was always a challenge. This is one I thought was pretty funny because Sergeant Thompson wanted to go up and check out this guard tower. So take a look at this ladder. I mean, that's what you would find. I mean, you wouldn't find like a real like ladder. You would find something they made like this. I told Sergeant Thompson, I said, that's fine, I'm not going up there. I'm not getting on that ladder. But that was very common, you know, the stuff you would see, you know, the supports for the formwork were just like branches and twigs and sitting up on blocks and the whole kind of thing. It was interesting. Something going out further out, we would have to get helicopters to go there. And so we could get a couple different ways. We could get Army helicopters. These are Black Hawks. Kind of a neat story. When I got out there and found out I was going to Afghanistan, a couple guys, I played football at West Point years ago, and a couple of my teammates I knew were over there. So I sent emails, hey, where are you guys at? They both were at Bagram, and one of them was an engineer colonel who then sent an email to the district commander and said, hey, why don't you send rounds to Bagram? We could use them here, and I worked pretty closely with them. So a couple of the most senior ranking guys outside the general on Bagram I knew pretty well. One was this guy right here, Rob Dickerson, who was the battalion commander of all the helicopters at Bagram. So it worked pretty nice all the way till December when he left for about the first 9 months that I could always just walk over and ask him. In this case, we're doing a hot refuel, but he actually flew me around. We would do aerial recons, so we would get these reports from our QA guys that were local nationals, right? And then we would, you know, every once in a while, if we had a place where we could land, we would go and inspect, but most of the time, we had to just fly over from the air, kind of assess. Yeah, it looks like about where they're at. That's my crew there. That's Robert Michaels, Lieutenant Booth, who was kind of in charge of my outside the wire projects. And this is my area engineer and my resident engineer. These guys were both great. And like I said, they really knew the business of what the Corps does and how to work with the things. So that was just, the four of us there. And this I thought was just from a picture from the air to show you what Afghanistan's like. And it's pretty amazing when you get up above it and look down, because that's what it all is. You know, it's nothing but stones and rocks and arid desert, and then these little valleys where for, you know, hundreds, thousands of years probably, they've been able to have their own forms of irrigation and tunnels. A lot of this stuff the Taliban destroyed when they went through and they burned down trees, they crushed all these irrigation canals and stuff, and so they're still trying to recover. But you still see a lot of these valleys where you have some pretty good agriculture that can go on, and it's all based on irrigation. All right, so let's talk about Bamyan. I mentioned the Kiwis. They were a lot of fun. And actually, you know, small world. When I was at the Command and General Staff College, I worked real closely with an infantry lieutenant colonel from New Zealand. And when I was stationed in Korea, we went over and spent a week plus, and toured us all around. We spent time in New Zealand. And then I get to Afghanistan, and they're in charge of the Kiwi base in Bamyan, which was pretty cool. So this guy was like one of his close buddies. John, my buddy, had retired 2 years earlier, but there's only 5,000 guys in the entire New Zealand Army. And this guy, this was a sergeant major who had been his first sergeant. But when we go out to Bamyan, this is where we would stay, this little Kiwi base. And they're a lot of fun. I mean, this is, that says don't take any pictures. But we were out, you know, Bamyan's a very permissive place. It's different. I don't know if any of you remember about 2000, Bamyan was on the Silk Road that went to China. So for thousands of years, this is a very important place. And it was a center of Buddhism, you know, from about 200 or 300 years, 200 or 300 AD. They had built these huge Buddhas in the cliffs. I'll show you a picture in a second that you can kind of see. You know, that at one point in 2000, the Taliban decided they were an affront to whatever, and they blew them up and destroyed them. But Bamyan has always kind of been a rough area. The Hazara is the ethnic group that's there, and they believe that they're related to Genghis Khan, because he came through in about 1200 and basically went through the valley. The legend is that his nephew went up to this this fortification, and they ended up killing his nephew. So he went through and killed every living thing, every domestic animal, every man, woman, child in the valley, and then left behind 1,000 guys to control whatever's left in Bamyan. And that's what, when you look at them, they look like they're Mongolian, they look like Chinese. They don't look like other Afghans do. But because they look different and because they're Shia Muslim, they have always been persecuted by everybody, basically, and especially by the Taliban. They were ruthless to them. So this has become a very, obviously, a very permissive place. And we did some construction there on a women's college. And so we worked with the Kiwis when we were there. And that's on top of their guard shack. It's like a Kiwi bird. They got a good sense of humor. And they had the best food. They actually had real cooks that would come in and cook, so we'd always try to make sure we got there and got a meal before we left. And this is what I was talking about. So we went up on this, what's called PT Hill, just to kind of get these views. But the Kiwi base is right down here. It's a dirt airstrip that we would fly in. Sometimes we fly in fixed wing. Sometimes we fly in with helicopters. But see these two, all through these cliffs were these little caves that the Buddhist monks used to live in thousands of years ago. And there's still some people that live in them. But these two huge areas right here were where these beautiful Buddhas were that the Taliban blew up in 2000. They're completely destroyed now, which is just a tragedy. But so it was an interesting place. This is the school we were working on. One of the first times we went out there, they were just getting the form work done. And then you can see kind of where they started. And then I had a few more pictures later as they started, the school came together. And by the time we left, a year later, it was ready to open. It was pretty neat to see. You see the Afghan guys putting on the outer stucco on the walls, inspecting the roof work. And then every time we go outside the gate, that was part of the thing. I enjoyed, seeing the kids. And Bamyan was amazing because the kids were always speaking English. They always want to come to you and speak English. And they spoke English pretty well. And they were always looking. So I always carried pens and pencils with me. And then that way, but I always knew not to have too many. Maybe like 10, 20, because by the time you start handing them out, pretty soon it would become a mob scene. But these kids would come up as we were out. We were inspecting one of the roads that the PRTs were doing. And so we gave them the pencils and stuff, and they were pretty psyched about that. I told my own kids, man, if you guys were half as excited as these Afghan kids were about getting a pencil, or going to school, that would be awesome. But they recognize that the way to make a better life is to get an education, and they're all looking to do that. But they were really a friendly group. And then this was just something I threw in here because I thought it was amazing. We were waiting for a lift back to Bagram, and these Blackhawks came and landed. And we're like, are those ones that were supposed to take us back? And I didn't know, everything was. So the chief came walking over, and I said, hey, are you headed back to Bagram? He said, well, not right away. And I said, well, when? He said, well, we got, it'll be a couple hours. And I said, well, that's as soon as we'll get back. So it was all right for you. There was like 5 of us. We jump in, and he said, yeah, go ahead. So we jumped in, and I didn't know where we were going. We flew west out of Bamyan, and we ended up, what they were doing is basically taking a little tourist trip that we were the beneficiary of flying over to the Bamyan Lakes. And this was, pictures don't do this justice, but the picture like the Grand Canyon with these huge spring-fed lakes, just a gorgeous. This is actually the first national park in Afghanistan. While I was over there, they designated this as a national park. And I'd like to think someday that there'll actually be a huge tourist thing to go there because it's phenomenal. I got a couple pictures in here. So here's the other Black Hawk. So if you get kind of a picture of how big and immense this place was, it was just cool. We were just thinking, man, you can't. Where else can you get a tour like this, the Bamyan Lakes? You kind of flew, and you can kind of see. They start and they kind of step down. So as this one overflows, it comes down the rocks into the next one, and then the next one. They're like 6 or 7 of them that are big steps down. Pretty amazing. You can kind of see here how it's flowing over the top. So that was pretty cool to see. This is Bamyan. The last time we went back was late February, and this is what it looked like in late February. It was at about 8,000 foot elevation, so it was pretty high up, and they had a lot of snow up in there. And I put this in. This is what they called the Silent City. And this was the fortification they're talking about. Legend has it that this is where Genghis Khan came through and he killed his nephew, so he decided he was going to wipe out everything in the valley. And he did. And after that, which was about 1200, I think, nobody's ever gone back up there to try to reoccupy that ground. It's kind of like, you know, bad juju. So, but it was pretty amazing. You know, you think about history in our country, right? And we talk about 200, 250 years. I mean, we're talking, you know, 500, 800, 1,200 years ago. But again, Bamyan was part of that Silk Road that led to China, through Europe, and so that was it's always been a very prized area. And that's what the school looked like the last time we were there before we were ready to go. It was basically outside of getting the generator in place and getting the generator going, it was ready to go. The generators are always a big problem. When we had the Afghan National Police thing too, you know, we had these generators as part of the contract, but if they don't know how to use them, and then they can't get fuel for them, so they don't use them, and it's a constant battle. But this was I think going to be a successful project because it was one of the buildings that was part of the Women's Teachers College, and they were pretty excited about getting that thing opened up in the spring. And again, this is Bamyan City. I put some pictures in here because again, you know, like I said, I always bring Bamyan City was very permissive. So Bamyan and Panjshir were both places that once you came in there, body armor came off, the weapons came off, and that was just kind of the agreement, and we didn't have any issues with those folks at all. So this is one of our PRT Corps of Engineer workers, Bill Stratton, and we would, like I said, I would always carry pens around so that you start handing out pens. Pretty soon you get a mob scene. But you see how excited these kids were just to they just wanted to get a pen, and they were smiling and happy, and it was pretty cool. And this is this is what you're dealing with. So this is a guy like a blacksmith, you know, and he has his whatever that is that he's got his oven there with the fire going, and he's pounding on, you know, a piece of steel and making these little tools and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of hard to believe that that's still the way people live. This guy's bringing his donkey in for a tune-up, I think. He had to get a reshoot or something. I thought this was pretty funny. Looks like this must be the gym. I don't know if I'd be working out in there. But that's the way, you know, that's just going through downtown Bamyan. That's the way things look. And this was my crew. And like the first, I was telling Dr. Fleischer, I put the first picture up with me standing in front of that helicopter and just kind of talking about the complexities of Afghanistan. So if you see the helicopter, we fly Blackhawks when we could get them, but the Corps also contracted with these, you know, different firms that were offering, you know, transportation. So anybody know what kind of helicopter that is?
Another Russian helicopter.
Huh?
The Russian helicopter.
Yeah, it's an Mi-8 helicopter. It's a Russian helicopter, right? So it's a Russian helicopter. I think that's a Colombian flag. So it was registered to the Colombian company, and the crew that was in it were all Kiwis from New Zealand. So, you know, you're kind of wondering, man, I wonder if this thing's actually going to fly. But, you know, you got around where you could. And then this is just some of the pictures. Again, Bamyan City right in here, and there's one of the big Buddha, which again is just nothing but a big hole in the cliff right now, which is a shame. But there are some rumors that there's another sleeping Buddha somewhere that they're trying to find, that they think, based on some writings in 800 by some people, that they might actually be able to uncover this huge Buddha that's, you know, buried underground now. But the two that were in the cliffs are completely destroyed. All right, Panjshir. Panjshir is another interesting place in the history of Afghanistan. Shah Mohammad Massoud was in charge up in Panjshir. He was a Mujahideen, fought against the Soviets, but he was very liberal and Western leaning. So he actually, we were trying to support what they were doing against the Soviets, but a lot of that we had to do through Pakistan. Kind of fascinating history if you ever read about it. So he didn't get a lot of help. But once the Soviets left, then the Taliban also wanted to get rid of this guy. And they by the time 9/11 happened, he was like the last place in Afghanistan that wasn't under Taliban control. The day before 9/11, on September 10th, he was assassinated. And he is like George Washington times 10 over there. You go to Kabul, anywhere, you have these pictures of Massoud everywhere. But the key thing with Panjshir is that's where, after 9/11, our CIA, the very first people went into Panjshir, and based out of there to try to organize the Northern Alliance to go down and kick the Taliban out. So very friendly place if you're on their good side. But they're tough sons of guns up there, and there's projects that are going on up there that we're working. This is one of ours from up above the Afghan National Police headquarters that we were working on. You get the idea. They're all kind of cookie cutter things that we were working. I think I'll show you a little closer picture of what this is right here. That's what that is. So everywhere in Panjshir is nothing but just junk from the Soviets left over. It's sitting in the river, on the banks, everything. The Soviets tried very hard to conquer Panjshir and were never successful in doing it under Massoud's leadership. This is inside that building as we're walking through, kind of just checking the status of the construction out front. There he is right there. And that's his tomb. They actually have built, it's almost ready to open now. It's just about ready, but they, a huge monument right there in Panjshir up on the top of the crest of this mountain. It's pretty interesting. That's his grave right there. This was interesting because we were driving around and took this picture. See this right here? Any idea what that is? Yeah, they're artillery or tank shells that they use basically for the timbers. They slide them in there on either end. They find something useful to do with it. But, you got to remember this mentality. They've been basically fighting for, the entire lifetime of most of these people have been busy. And this valley, again, is one of those places where it's not, they don't really care about the national government, what they have to say. It's their valley. They know who comes and goes, and they control it. And they were the same way. They took pride in the fact that, no, we don't want you to drive around in your armored vehicles and have your weapons because, that would make us look bad. Okay. And they kept us safe. But here's some of the problems you have when you're working out in the provinces. So we had this contractor, right, with the Corps that was supposed to build this road. Okay, so this road, the current place where it goes through, there's buildings on either side. So what we were supposed to have happen was they're supposed to sit down and have these shuras, meet with the village leaders, and figure out how they can put this road through. But in this case, apparently that didn't happen too well. And the story is this guy went out to go fishing, came home, and half his house was gone because the bulldozer just went right down this middle of the street and took out half his home. So that was part of what we had to do with the PRT guys, was go out and meet with some of the villagers and try to explain how we were going to help them, recoup some of their losses. But it's always a tough thing to do because they understand that it's for the overall betterment, but when it's your house, it's really not too cool. So we were able to help make the contractor basically lean on the contractor to compensate these people and make sure then that they were then having these sures and that everything was agreed upon by the Afghans. That wasn't us that was dictating what they were going to do. And at the end of the day, if they couldn't figure it out, then we said, fine, we're not building the road here. You don't want the road, we won't build the road. And you usually could come up with a solution, but it didn't always work, and that was one of the situations that wasn't real pleasant. But we did work it out with them. All right, so that's kind of some of my little pictures going out and about. Building for the future. I just want to put this in here too. Anybody in the Knights of Columbus? Right? All right, good. I'm a Knight, and actually, before I went to Afghanistan, my dad said, hey, before you go, you should read this book called 3 Cups of Tea. Has anybody read that book? A couple people, right? Greg Mortensen. And his whole premise, was interesting. I got the chance, I read his book. I thought, what a great story. If you haven't read it, you should. It's very interesting. It sheds a lot of light on the whole region that he's working at. And Greg Mortensen kind of basically is building schools now through the Central Asia Institute over there, and he understands that what's really at stake over there is the education of the people, and not only the boys, but also he's a big advocate for the girls getting educated. So part of what we did, we had a Knights of Columbus group there, round table, and we all went and talked to our home councils, and they sent over, I think, it was like 28 40-pound boxes full of school supplies over, so that we could hand these things out. And that, to me, was just one of the neatest things that we did. This was actually St. Patrick's Day last year, March 17th, and we were able to work with the PRTs to get the up-armored vehicles. Normally, we flew to Panjshir. It was like a 4-hour drive, but we drove because we had all these school supplies, brought them out there, and loaded them up in the PRT compound in the trucks, and then we had to go meet with the Minister of Education and talk to him. That's him. He actually smiled, but I don't think they smile for pictures. But he was pretty happy, so we came and, yeah, he didn't look too happy there. But basically, we came and he said, yeah, we have a school that we could take these to give. His school is just starting in March. And so we actually went to this school called the Blue School, which was actually right on one of the roads was our project right here that we were familiar with this school. But they had, there's me and the principal, and we were able to bring these supplies in and hand out the school supplies to these little girls that were just coming to school. And they were very appreciative of that. It was kind of funny. They're very cute. They came kind of, we could see they were all excited. And the little ones especially were, this all smiles and happy to get this stuff, and they were filing through and getting them. The older girls, once they get to be about 10 years old, they're very, very conscious of, covering their face and were a little more shy. But it was neat to see. They were very excited to get this stuff. And I actually, before I deployed, I had checked out Greg Mortensen's website and saw that he was speaking up at West Point. So I went up and met him and told him what I was doing, where I was going, and he actually came to be a speaker at the prep school last year. And if you read his book, he was a medic in the Army, and he's very proud of his military service. At the end of the first book, he talks a lot, kind of derogatory about the laptop warriors and what are we doing over there. But he's been a big advocate of continuing on. When I heard him lecture, he's, hey, listen, the military has spent a lot of years over there. They get it. It's the politicians. The idea of 3 cups of tea is that, hey, you can't just rush in there and do things like you got to take your time. You got to sit down and get to know the people and listen to what they have to say. And part of his whole thing is education. So there were opportunities to work with the civil affairs folks. Lots of things like this that I think will really go a long way in the future of Afghanistan to help educate the kids so that they can overcome that 28% literacy rate. All right, so again, a little different than what you guys have seen in the past, but I think the point I'm trying to make to you is that engineering, whether you're master's or whether you're undergrad, the world needs engineers, and it needs people to get out there and be able to do things all over the world. There's opportunities everywhere you look. You guys, take a little time and look into what's going on. I understand, like a lot of you guys do Engineers Without Borders or some things like that. There's a lot of great work that you can do as an engineer. But the biggest thing is just kind of keeping an open mind and being able to go in and try to make the best of the situation. Maybe some of you guys end up being, in the Army Corps as civilians and get a chance to go over and do some things like this. But that was my year in Afghanistan. And I know I've gone kind of long, but I'd be happy to answer any questions about anything you have about anything. Open it up. Anyone? I know it's Friday afternoon. I appreciate you guys coming, even though Dr. Always probably had a twist somewhere. That's all right. You learned that at West Point when he was teaching up there, by the way. Sorry, Nancy. We taught together. Questions? Anybody? Yes, sir.
We talked a little bit about the future of Afghanistan and everything else, and sort of this enormous advocate for growth and using local contractors for all these different things. I had a lot of the engineers on board of this project through college, and sort of want to ask you the question in regards to long-term sustainable growth, and specifically the development initiatives there. What do you think is going to be the critical mass for when Afghans are going to start taking a leadership role for these initiatives?
Yeah, that's a great question. When? It isn't going to be anytime soon. I'll put it that way. And I know, politically, you talk about, well, we have to have an exit strategy. We can't do nation building. If we're going to make a difference in a place like Afghanistan, we're going to have to be there for a little while. There's no doubt about it. Having had a tour in Iraq and a tour in Afghanistan, a couple of things really strikingly different between the two. Number one, For an Iraqi, the idea of a strong central government, they don't have a problem with that. Right? They got Saddam, they're used to that. They're used to that idea that, okay, that guy says, that's what we do. In Afghanistan, it's very different. It's very ethnic groups. The terrain, in fact, breaks up the country so much. I mean, the idea of a country of Afghanistan, to a lot of them, it's still a very foreign concept. So, what has to happen in the long term, I think, is first we have to be able to get some form of security, get some kind of a functioning government that will at least, it's probably not going to look like American democracy, but it is hopefully going to be functional enough that it can have a secure concept of a country and at least not be a place where it's the wild, wild west and any terrorist can go do whatever they want there unchecked. So one of the things we focused on is the road network, and the idea that a lot of studies have been done. Hey, if you have roads that are good roads that you can, commerce increases, interaction between people increases, and that's a good thing. So one of the biggest projects going on with the Corps and other people working over there is a lot of road projects. So we're out there, paving roads. We did that in a lot of our provinces with the hopes that that will increase the economic. I think at the end of the day, if these people feel like there's a brighter future, that they can get an education and that they can make a better life, they're probably less likely to go strap on a bomb and blow themselves up. And so it's part of that is what I really believe, after with Greg Mortensen. In fact, he even had a school that he built right in Panjshir province. We had to drive right by him. When he came to talk to the prep school, I wasn't back yet, so I was able to teleconference with him. And we talked for about 20 minutes about the different things that he was doing. But yeah, when is that going to be? It's not going to be anytime soon. And that's what, that's the thing. It's probably going to take 20 years to get this next generation educated and out there able to take a leadership role in their government. It's going to be a real challenge. Karzai himself, is he the guy that's going to be able to do it? I mean, the realities of survival over there, and who he has to work with, and what deals need to be made. It's going to be interesting. So that's a great question. Maybe you guys will be part of the solution at some point. But one thing I do know, it's not going to happen in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. So, it's kind of going to be up to our political will if we're willing to invest in that, if that's important to us or not. And, people aren't going to make that decision. National leaders make those kind of decisions. Anything else? Anything at all?
Well, let's give our speaker a